In the shadowed cradle of eternal winter, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, a single howl pierced the veil between the living and the damned. Ilara's breath fogged the iron bars of the auctioneer's cage. Her body curled tight against the biting wind that howled through the mountain pass like a chorus of forsaken souls. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and decay, the kind that clung to the underbelly of the world where outcasts were bartered like livestock. Snowflakes danced mockingly around her, each one a fragile promise of purity she could no longer claim. She was an Omega, born under the Diusa's pale gaze, her wolf spirit once a whisper of wild freedom in the pack's endless forests. But rejection had stripped her bare, leaving only the raw ache of exile. It had begun 3 moons past, in the heart of the Silverfang clan. Her alpha mate, Thorn, had marked her with a bite that burned like fire in her veins, a union sealed under the full moon's approving light. Yet whispers of her hidden gift, a tongue that unraveled the ancient vampire dialects, languages long buried with the blood wars, had poisoned the pack's trust. Witch's tongue, they called it, a curse that invited the undead shadows from the eastern crypts. Thorn's eyes, once warm with possession, had hardened to ice. In the great hall, lit by roaring hearths that spat embers like accusations, he had renounced her before the elders. "She carries the scent of the grave," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls carved with lunar runes. The pack's howls of agreement drowned her pleas, a symphony of betrayal that shattered her spirit. Banished, they had dragged her to the borderlands, where the mountains clawed at the sky and the snow never fully melted, even in the false thaw of summer. Left to die in the wilds, or worse, to wander into the auction pits where humans and lesser beasts traded in flesh. But Ilara had survived the first nights, her wolf form a shadow slipping through the drifts, guided by an inner fire that refused to gut her. Hunger gnawed at her like a lover's teeth, and the cold seeped into her bones, turning her blood to sluggish rivers. Yet it was the loneliness that wounded deepest, the void where her pack's bond had once thrummed, now a hollow echo in her chest. The auction grounds sprawled at the foot of jagged peaks, a ramshackle bazaar of tents and torches flickering against the encroaching dusk. The wind carried the clamor, merchants hawking enchanted blades, seers murmuring prophecies over steaming cauldrons, and the low growls of chained shifters bartered for labor or sport. Ilara's cage was one of many, perched on a raised platform slick with ice. Her wrists bore iron manacles etched with suppression runes, dulling her shift, leaving her human form frail and exposed. A thin shift of wool, torn at the hem, did little against the gale that whipped her dark hair like raven wings. Around her neck hung the only remnant of her old life, a silver pendant, shaped like a crescent moon, cradling a drop of crystallized blood. It had been her mother's, a talisman said to hold the Diusa's mercy. Now it felt like a noose, heavy with the weight of what she'd lost. The auctioneer, a grizzled human with eyes like polished obsidian, paced before the gathering crowd. His voice boomed over the murmurs, amplified by some foul magic. Lot 13, Ilara of the Silverfangs, Omega Wolf with the gift of tongues. Speak the dead languages she will, vampiric rites, forgotten curses, the whispers of the crypt. Perfect for scholars, spies, or those who dare commune with the night eternal. Starting bid, 50 silver crowns. Bidders emerged from the throng, mercenaries in fur-lined cloaks, rival pack scouts with scars mapping old battles, even a veiled sorceress whose aura hummed with arcane hunger. Ilara's gaze fixed on the horizon, where the moon began its ascent, a sickle of bone-white light slicing through the bruised clouds. She could feel its pull, faint through the runes, stirring the wolf within her to a restless whine. What strength was this, she wondered, if not the choice to endure? Mercy was a blade turned inward, carving space for survival amid the ruin. A hush fell as the first bids rose, sharp and greedy. 60! called a burly orc trader, his tusks glinting. 75, countered a fox shifter, sly eyes narrowing. Ilara's heart pounded, each beat a drum of defiance against the cage's chill. She thought of the forests. She might never run again, the fireside tales of Omegas who rose from ashes to claim their thrones. But this was no tale. This was the raw edge of despair, where the wind tasted of salt from unshed tears. Then, from the shadows at the auction's edge, a figure stirred. Tall and cloaked in midnight velvet, he moved with the lethal grace of one who commanded both night and storm. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The Vampire King, Draven of the Crimson Spire. His presence was a chill deeper than winter, eyes like polished garnets catching the torchlight. Ilara's pendant warmed against her skin, an inexplicable pulse, as if the blood within recognized kin. He raised a gloved hand, voice like velvet over steel. 1,000 crowns. The auctioneer stammered, the bids crumbling into silence. Draven's gaze locked on Ilara, not with hunger, but a shadowed curiosity that pierced her to the soul. In that moment, under the moon's indifferent watch, she felt the first stir of something ancient, a connection forged in the alchemy of exile and enigma. The cage door creaked open, and as rough hands pulled her toward her new master, the wind howled a warning, carrying the faint scent of blood and forgotten oaths. The carriage jolted over the frozen ruts of the mountain trail, each bump a jolt that echoed the turmoil in Ilara's chest. Bound loosely now by silken cords rather than iron, Draven's concession to her shifter nature, the pendant at her throat swayed like a pendulum, its crystallized blood drop catching slivers of moonlight through the narrow window slits. The air inside was heavy with the scent of aged leather and something metallic, like rust-tanged earth after a storm. She sat rigid, her back pressed against the velvet cushions, eyes fixed on the Vampire King across from her. He was a statue carved from shadow, his cloak pooling around him like spilled ink, face half hidden beneath a hood that did little to mask the sharp planes of his features or the faint glow of his garnet eyes. Draven did not speak as the horses' hooves crunched through the snow, their breath steaming in the night. The wind outside battered the wooden frame, carrying distant wives from unseen wolves, warnings or laments, she couldn't tell. Ilara's skin prickled, not just from the cold seeping through the cracks, but from the instinctive pull she felt toward him. It was the wolf in her, sensing the predator's aura, ancient, unyielding, laced with a sorrow that mirrored her own exile. Yet fear coiled in her gut like a serpent, rationalizing the connection as mere survival's trick. He had bought her, after all, not saved her. What use was a wolf's tongue to a king of the undead? To decipher curses, perhaps, or unravel the secrets of his enemies' tomes. She was a tool, sharpened by rejection, her gift a curse that had driven Thorn to cast her out. The carriage lurched to a halt at last, the driver, a gaunt vampire thrall, leaping down to unlatch the door. Cold air rushed in, laced with the crisp bite of pine and the underlying rot of thawing earth. Draven rose fluidly, extending a gloved hand that she ignored, stepping out into the knee-deep snow of a secluded glade. Towering evergreens loomed like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with frost, and the moon hung low, bathing the clearing in a silver glow that turned the world ethereal, almost forgiving. But Ilara knew better. Beauty in these lands often masked peril. "Why this place?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The words hung between them, fogging the air. She rubbed her wrists where the cords had chafed, the pendant warm against her chilled skin. A small defiance, clutching at the memory of her mother's voice, whispering of the Deuce's hidden paths. Draven turned, his eyes reflecting the lunar light like twin pools of blood under ice. "A way station," he replied, his tone low and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "The roads from the auction are watched, rivals, old debts. They scent weakness like hounds. He gestured to a low stone structure half buried in the snow, its entrance flanked by iron braziers flickering with unnatural blue flames. No smoke rose. Vampire craft, she realized, fire without warmth, light without life. She followed him inside, the door groaning shut behind them, sealing out the wind's howl. The interior was sparse, a hearth where those same blue flames danced, casting elongated shadows on walls, etched with faded runes that hummed faintly to her gifted ear, fragments of the dead tongue, words of binding and eternal night. A table bore a decanter of dark liquid and 2 goblets, beside which lay a fur pelt for seating. Draven shed his cloak, revealing armor of blackened steel etched with crimson veins, and a face marked by a thin scar tracing his jawline, silvered by time. He was no mere lord. The air around him thrummed with restrained power, yet his movements held a melancholy grace, as if each step recalled a lost kingdom. Ilara hesitated at the threshold, her wolf senses warring. Flee or endure? The pendant pulsed again, a subtle heat that spread through her veins, stirring visions unbidden. Blood oaths under crimson moons, a language of shadows that only she could voice. "You bought me for my tongue," she said, meeting his gaze. "To speak what the dead won't whisper to their own. But what curse haunts you that you'd pay a king's ransom for a rejected Omega?" He poured the liquid, wine laced with something vital, she guessed, and offered her a goblet. She took it, sniffing the metallic tang, but did not drink. Draven's lips curved faintly, not a smile, but an acknowledgement of her wariness. "Guilt," he admitted, settling onto the pelt with a sigh that seemed to age him. "Centuries ago in the blood wars, I sealed the crypts of my kin to end a plague of feral sires. But in doing so, I bound their final words, tongues of power, spells of resurrection, into oblivion. Now echoes rise, whispers of betrayal from within my own spire. A rival, claiming my throne, uses fragments of that lost language to summon shades. Only one who hears the dead as the living might, could translate the warnings." His eyes met hers, and in that gaze, Ilara saw not command, but a fracture, the weight of duty that had cost him more than empires. The connection ignited. Instinctive as a full moon's call, her wolf recognizing the echo of her own shame. Yet she denied it, curiosity sharpening into caution. "And if I refuse, you'll chain me again? Force the words from my throat?" Draven's scar twitched, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "Choice was stolen from you once. I will not steal it again. But the night closes in. Hunters from the auction follow, drawn by the scent of your blood and my gold. We share an enemy now, those who trade in broken souls." Outside, the wind rose to a wail, and a distant howl answered. Not wolf, but something hollow, undead. Ilara's hand closed around the pendant, its blood drop seeming to throb in rhythm with her heart. Fear and curiosity twisted into something unnamed, a thread pulling her toward the abyss. What strength was mercy, if not offered to the damned? She sipped the wine, its warmth spreading like forbidden fire, and nodded once. In that moment, under the glade's veiled moon, exile met enigma, and the first fragile bond formed, not in passion, but in the shared chill of survival's edge. The flames in the hearth leaped higher, casting their blue light on the runes, which seemed to writhe like awakening serpents. Ilara felt the pull deepen, her gift stirring at the edges of her mind, unraveling syllables from the stone, promises of alliance or ruin. Draven watched her silent, his guilt a shadow that mirrored her rejection. The night pressed close, enemies circling, and in the heart of winter's grip, curiosity bloomed into reluctant trust. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The blue flames in the hearth hissed like conspirators as Alara set down her goblet, the metallic wine lingering on her tongue like a vow unspoken. The way station's walls seemed to lean inward, the runes pulsing with a rhythm that matched the quickening beat of her heart. Outside, the wind's wail sharpened into something more sinister, a chorus of scraping claws on stone, shadows slithering through the snowdrifts. Draven's gaze flicked to the door, his body tensing beneath the armor's unyielding embrace, the scar along his jaw catching the ethereal light like a vein of frozen lightning. "They're here," he murmured, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the air, stirring the pendant at her throat. It warmed again, the crystallized blood within glowing faintly, as if awakening to the threat. Alara's wolf senses flared, suppressed but not silenced, picking up the stench of decay and greed wafting from the glade, the auctioneer's hounds, mercenaries drawn by the promise of recapture and ransom. Her rejection had marked her as prey once. Now it bound her to this undead king in a fragile alliance against the world's voracious maw. She rose, instincts overriding fear, her bare feet silent on the fur-strewn floor. How many? The question came unbidden, her voice steady, laced with the edge of her Omega heritage, a quiet ferocity born from exile's forge. Draven met her eyes, surprise flickering in those garnet depths, as if her willingness to stand pierced his armored solitude. He moved to a shadowed alcove, retrieving a slender blade etched with crimson runes, its edge humming with ancient hunger. 5, perhaps 6. Thralls and shifters bought loyalty from the pits. They track your scent. Wolf blood calls to the lowest bidders. The door shuddered under the first assault, wood splintering like brittle bone. Alara's breath caught, the cold seeping deeper into her lungs, but she snatched a poker from the hearth, its tip glowing blue-hot. The pendant swung free as she positioned herself beside him, shoulder to shoulder in the narrow space, a contact that sent an unwelcome spark through her veins, instinctive and denied. He was no packmate, no savior, just a shadowed monarch bartering for her curse as keenly as Thorn had discarded it. Yet in this moment, under the moon's veiled gaze filtering through a cracked shutter, their shared peril wove the first threads of empathy, fragile as frost on a blade. The door burst inward with a howl of wind and fury, snow swirling in like vengeful spirits. The first attacker lunged, a hulking thrall with eyes milky from undeath, fangs bared in a snarl that reeked of grave soil. Draven met him mid-stride, blade slicing clean through flesh that parted like mist, black ichor spraying across the threshold. Ilara swung the poker, catching another in the knee, a fox shifter, lithe and treacherous, his yip turning to a gurgle as blue fire seared his fur. Pain bloomed in her arm from the recoil, but she pressed on, the pendant's heat a talisman against the chaos, its blood drops seeming to whisper encouragements in the dead tongue. Endure, bind, survive. They fought back to back now, the way station a whirlwind of shadows and strikes. Draven's movements were poetry and violence, elegant, merciless, each parry echoing centuries of blood-soaked regret. A mercenary's axe glanced his shoulder, drawing a line of dark crimson that steamed in the chill air. He didn't flinch, only countered with a thrust that felled the man in a heap of twitching limbs. Ilara dodged a claw swipe, her shift runes weakening under the strain, allowing her nails to elongate into claws. She raked across a thrall's throat, feeling the wet tear of sinew, the hot spill of unnatural blood that burned her skin like acid. The scent filled the room, copper and rot, mingling with the pine-kissed wind to form a visceral tapestry of survival. In the fray's heart, as a final shifter circled them, yellow eyes gleaming with pack-hunter cunning, Alara felt the bond ignite. Draven's presence at her flank was no longer alien, it was anchor, his guilt mirroring her shame in a silent communion. He could have commanded her, left her to the wolves of the auction, but instead he shielded her strike, his free hand brushing her arm, a touch that lingered, electric, stirring the wolf within to a confused whine. "Your fire," he said through gritted teeth, as they dispatched the last foe together, her poker plunging into the shifter's chest while his blade severed the head. "It rivals the moon's own." Panting, they stood amid the carnage, the blue flames guttering low, casting long shadows that danced like specters of what might have been. Snow drifted through the shattered door, blanketing the fallen in white shrouds, the wind's howl softening to a mournful sigh. Ilara's body ached, wounds shallow but stinging, her shift straining against the fading runes. She touched the pendant, its glow dimming, the crystallized blood cool now against her fevered skin. Empathy bloomed in the silence, unbidden, seeing in Draven not the monster of legends, but a king fractured by choices long past, much like her own banishment. He had lost his kin to duty's blade, she, her pack to fear's whisper. The connection deepened, resisted still by the rational chill of her mind. Trust was a luxury for the unbroken, but undeniable, a thread pulling them from isolation's edge. Draven sheathed his blade, his scar stark in the moonlight's intrusion, eyes holding hers with a melancholy intensity. "We cannot linger. The spire calls, and with it, the echoes I need you to voice." He extended his cloak, draping it over her shoulders, warmth from his body, scented with aged velvet and faint blood, enveloping her like an unintended embrace. Ilara pulled it close, the gesture stirring a warmth that had nothing to do with fabric. What was strength, if not choosing alliance in the bloodied snow? Mercy, she realized, was the bridge between damned souls, fragile yet unyielding. As they stepped into the glade, the moon climbing higher, silvering the fresh drifts over the dead, the pendant pulsed once more, a symbol of bonds reforged in fire and frost. The night stretched before them, enemies vanquished but greater shadows looming, and in that shared breath, exile found its reluctant companion. The moon's silver sickle carved deeper into the night sky as Ilara and Draven pressed onward, the snow-crusted trail winding like a vein toward the crimson spire's distant silhouette. His cloak enveloped her, heavy with the scent of velvet and lingering blood, a reluctant shield against the wind's relentless bite. Each step crunched through fresh powder, the cold seeping through her thin shift like accusatory fingers, reminding her of the fragility beneath her defiance. The pendant at her throat swayed with the rhythm of their flight, its crystallized blood drop catching moonlight in fractured prisms, whispers of a language she had long suppressed, now stirring like embers in her veins. Exile had taught her silence, survival demanded she listen. Draven led without words, his armored form cutting a path through the evergreens that clawed at the stars. The fight at the way station lingered in her muscles, a dull ache that mirrored the deeper wound of Thorn's rejection, the pack's howls still echoing in her dreams, branding her as other. Yet here, beside this undead king, the isolation fractured. His guilt was a palpable shadow, cast long by the moon, and in its light she glimpsed her own, the gift that had unraveled her world, a tongue for the dead that no living soul could bear. Rationalization clung to her like frost. This alliance was necessity, not kinship, his purchase a chain disguised as freedom. But the pendant's warmth betrayed her, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, drawing her gaze to the scar on his jaw, a silvered testament to battles older than her clan's forests. They crested a ridge as dawn's false promise grayed the horizon, the spire emerging like a fang thrust from the earth's frozen heart. Towering spires of obsidian and ice pierced the clouds, veins of crimson crystal pulsing faintly within, as if the structure breathed with stolen life. Wind howled through the passes, carrying the faint clamor of nocturnal unrest, uives from distant wolves mingling with hollow echoes, undead sentinels patrolling the battlements. Draven halted at the tree line, his garnet eyes scanning the gloom. "The outer wards are breached," he said, voice a low thunder that vibrated through her bones. "My rival's shades whisper through the cracks. We enter as ghosts." Ilara nodded, her breath fogging the air, the cold sharpening her senses to a razor's edge. The pendant burned now, insistent, as if the blood within recognized homecoming, or doom. They slipped into the shadow of the walls, Draven murmuring incantations that parted the veil of illusion, revealing a concealed archway slick with rime. Inside, the air thickened, heavy with the must of ancient stone and the metallic tang of spilled vitae. Torchlight flickered from sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters, and the floor echoed with their footsteps, a hollow drumbeat underscoring the spire's melancholic pulse. Deeper they ventured, through corridors etched with faded murals of blood wars, vampires in crimson armor clashing under eclipsed moons, wolves as reluctant allies in the fray. Ilara's wolf stirred, suppressed runes fraying under the spire's ambient magic, allowing flickers of instinct, the scent of intrigue layered like strata of deceit. Draven's hand brushed hers in the narrow passage, guiding her around a corner where blue flames guttered in alcoves, their light revealing a chamber sealed by iron doors veined with runes. He pressed a palm to the metal, and it groaned open, exhaling dust and decay. The room beyond was a crypt of knowledge, shelves groaning under tomes bound in pale leather, scrolls unfurled on pedestals like desiccated skins. At the center stood a dais, upon which rested an obsidian slab inscribed with swirling script, the dead vampire tongue, its curves like veins frozen mid-flow. Draven approached, his scar tightening as he traced the glyphs, garnet eyes narrowing. "Here," he murmured, the word laced with centuries of regret. "The final seal from the wars. I bound it myself, silencing my kin's resurrection rites to end the plague. But fragments escaped, twisted by my brother's hand, Vesper, who claims betrayal in my duty. These words hold the key to his summons. If I cannot voice them, the shades will consume us all." Ilara's gift ignited then, unbidden, as if the moon itself had commanded it. The pendant flared hot against her skin, the crystallized blood drop glowing crimson, and the script on the slab writhed into clarity. Syllables uncoiled in her mind, not as alien curses but as a symphony of sorrow, oaths of loyalty shattered, pleas from the bound undead echoing like wind through crypts. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, her voice emerging soft at first, then resonant, weaving the dead language into the living air. Elindor Veshkara, blood of the eternal, unbound by king's remorse. The words flowed, visceral, tasting of iron and ash on her tongue, each inflection stirring visions, Draven's past self, young and fierce, sealing the crypts amid screams, his blade dripping with the vitae of his own. Vesper's shadow, lurking, twisting the echoes into weapons. The slab trembled, runes igniting in veins of red light that spiderwebbed across the floor. Shadows coalesced from the corners. Ethereal shades, translucent forms of long-fallen vampires, their eyes hollow pits of accusation. One reached for Draven, whispering in fractured tones that only she could fully comprehend. "Betrayer. Your seal starves us." But Ilara's voice rose, commanding, her gift manifesting as a bridge between realms. "Silent no more, but chained to truth," she intoned, the pendant channeling the power, its blood drop pulsing like a heart. The shades halted, drawn to her light, their forms stabilizing, revealing not rage, but desperation, the lost words of resurrection, pure and untainted by Vesper's corruption. Draven staggered back, his face paling beyond the undead norm, eyes wide with revelation. In her voice, he heard not just translation, but destiny's unveiling. She was no mere tool, but the pathfinder, the Omega, whose tongue could heal the wounds his choices had wrought. Guilt cracked in his gaze, mirroring her own shattered bonds, the connection surging instinctive and profound. Yet she resisted, rationalizing the pull as the gift's illusion, fear coiling at the vulnerability it exposed. What was this power, if it demanded she bear her soul to the damned? The shades bowed, whispering allegiance, and the slab's light bathed them both, silver and crimson entwining like fates intertwined. As the echoes faded, Draven turned to her, voice hushed with awe. "You are the key, Alara, not to my curse but to its redemption, the Deuce's mercy woven in wolf's blood." The pendant cooled, its glow subsiding, but the chamber hummed with newfound clarity, enemies' secrets laid bare. Outside, the wind howled a prelude to confrontation, the moon witnessing the birth of purpose amid the ruins, like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The crimson veins in the obsidian slab pulsed like a dying heart as the shades dissolved into wisps of shadow, their whispers fading into the chamber's musty hush. Alara's voice lingered in the air, a fragile echo of the dead tongue, tasting of ash and iron on her lips. The pendant at her throat cooled to a dull throb. Its crystallized blood dropped heavy now, as if burdened by the truths it had unveiled. She stood amid the flickering torchlight, the spire's walls closing in like the jaws of judgment, her breath ragged in the chill that seeped from the stone. Revelation had come not as triumph, but as a mirror, reflecting her gift's double edge. The same curse that had severed her from the Silverfangs now binding her to this vampire king's fractured legacy. Draven's garnet eyes held hers, stripped of their armored veil, raw with the weight of centuries. "Vesper," he said, the name a blade drawn slow, "my blood brother, twisted by the war's remnants. He was at my side when I sealed the crypts, but envy festered in the silence I imposed. Now he summons the corrupted shades from the outer crypts, using stolen fragments to rally the undead against me. Your words, they purify what he perverts." His scar gleamed silver in the torch's glow, a map of old wounds that mirrored the fresh ache in her chest, the instinctive pull toward him, resisted like a thorn in her paw. He was no alpha of fur and fang, yet his melancholy duty echoed Thorn's betrayal, a shared exile in the soul's frozen wastes. Freedom whispered to her wolf, "Flee this spire, reclaim the wilds alone." But the pendant's warmth anchored her, stirring curiosity into something perilously close to care. The wind outside the chamber howled a prelude, rattling the iron doors like chains forged in fury. Alara's senses sharpened, the fraying runes on her wrists allowing her wolf to stir. A low growl in her veins, scenting intruders through the stone. Decay laced with pine, the rot of undead thralls mingled with the musk of living shifters. "They come," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear coiling in her gut. Draven nodded, retrieving his blade from its sheath, the crimson runes igniting with a hunger that matched the moon's ascent beyond the narrow slits in the wall. Silver light spilled in, bathing the tomes in ethereal frost, turning the room into a stage for reckoning. The doors burst inward with a thunderous crack, snow swirling in like vengeful ghosts. Vesper emerged first, cloaked in tattered crimson velvet that drank the light, his face a pallid echo of Draven's, sharper, crueler, eyes burning with garnet fire untempered by guilt. Flanking him were shades, half-formed wraiths twisting from the shadows, and at his side, a figure that struck Alara like a claw to the heart. Thorn, her former mate, his fur-matted form half-shifted, eyes wild with the zeal of a traitor bought by promises of power. The pack's rejection had not sated his fear. It had driven him here, to the borderland's underbelly, allying with the undead rival who offered vengeance against the witch's tongue that had tainted his claim. "You bring her here, brother?" Vesper's voice slithered like oil over ice, laced with the dead language's hiss that only Alara could fully unravel, mockery woven with spells of binding. The Omega Cur, whose words mock our eternal night? I smelled her gift from the auction winds, a beacon for the forsaken. Thorn snarled beside him, his gaze locking on Alara, raw with a mix of possession and loathing. The air thickened with his scent, familiar pine and earth, now soured by betrayal's rot. She was mine to discard, he growled, claws extending, but you hoard her like a relic. The pack whispers of your weakness, Draven, sealing kin to rot while shadows rise. Join us, or fall, with your remorse. Draven stepped forward, blade raised, his form a bastion of shadowed steel against the encroaching horde. The blue torches guttered, casting elongated specters that danced across the walls, the wind's wail rising to a chorus of distant howls, wolves from the Silverfangs, perhaps, drawn by Thorn's treachery, or mere echoes of the spire's unrest. Alara's heart pounded, a drum of dilemma. Freedom meant turning from this fray, slipping into the snow-choked wilds where no king or mate could claim her. Yet love's shadow loomed, unbidden, resisted, the bond with Draven, forged in refuge's fire and revelation's light, demanding she choose compassion over flight. Forgiveness for Thorn's blade, or war to shatter the chains of past and present. The clash erupted visceral and swift, shadows lunging like tempests of night. Vesper's shades coalesced into claws of mist, raking at Draven's armor with shrieks that clawed the air. He parried with lethal grace, blade singing through ether, each strike a lament for the brother he'd failed. Thorn charged Alara, his wolf form bursting free in a blur of gray fur and bared fangs, the scent of their old mark flaring in her veins, a ghost of union now poisoned. She dodged, the pendant swinging wild, its blood drop igniting as her gift surged. Words spilled from her lips unbidden, the dead tongue commanding the shades. Vesh-Karanul, shadows, yield to truth's vein. The wraiths faltered, twisting toward Vesper in confusion, their forms fraying under the purity of her voice. Pain bloomed as Thorn's paw clipped her shoulder, tearing cloth and flesh, hot blood spilling to stain the snow-dusted floor like crimson petals under moonlight. She countered with claws extended, raking his flank. The metallic tang of his wound mingling with her own, a sensory storm of copper and frost that blurred rage into sorrow. "Why?" she gasped, pinning him against a shelf, tomes tumbling like fallen oaths. His eyes, once her haven, gleamed with fanatic gleam. "Your tongue invites the grave, Alara. Vesper promises purity, war on the undead taint, a pack reborn without your curse. Forgive me, or die with Draven's delusions." Across the chamber, Draven dueled Vesper, brothers locked in a whirlwind of steel and shadow, the air humming with incantations that scorched the stone. A shade's claw grazed Draven's side, drawing dark vitae that steamed in the cold, but he pressed on, voice breaking through the fray. "Mercy was my seal, Vesper, not betrayal. End this. Reclaim what duty demands." Vesper laughed, a hollow echo, hurling a bolt of corrupted night that shattered a pedestal, scrolls igniting in blue flames that licked the air without warmth. Alara's choice crystallized in the chaos, the pendant burning like a forge against her skin. Freedom tempted, sever Thorn's throat, flee the spire's maw, wander the eternal winter alone, her wolf unbound. Or forgiveness. "Spare the traitor!" Voice the words to heal Vesper's envy, bind love's fragile thread to Draven's guilt-ridden throne. War or compassion. The wind howled judgment, blood slick underfoot, the moon's light fracturing through the shattered doors like the Deusa's fractured gaze. She rose, voice rising above the din, the dead tongue a bridge or a blade. Elendor Kresh, blood binds, not breaks. Shades turned. Thorn hesitated, and in that suspended breath, her heart tore, Strength, she knew, was mercy's cruel election, love's redemption, a war within. The chamber trembled, shadows recoiling, but Vesper's counterspell lashed out, a wave of night that hurled Alara back, her vision blurring with pain and possibility. Draven's cry pierced the storm, a king's vow amid the bloodied snow, as the confrontation hung on her unmade choice: freedom's solitude or love's redemptive chain. The chamber's air thickened with the acrid tang of scorched vitae and splintered stone, the moon's fractured light spilling through the shattered doors like spilled mercury, illuminating the fray in stark silver and crimson. Ilara lay sprawled against the cold floor, the wave of Vesper's corrupted night crashing through her like a winter torrent, ribs aching with the force of it, blood from her shoulder wound seeping warm and sticky into the snow-dusted cracks. The pendant at her throat burned fiercely now, its crystallized blood drop a molten heart against her skin, pulsing with the rhythm of her labored breaths, a talisman demanding she rise, not as victim, but as arbiter of fates entwined. Pain was her forge, rejection her anvil. In this bloodied sanctum, rebirth beckoned, veiled in the haze of choice. Thorn loomed over her, his half-shifted form heaving, fur matted with ichor and frost, eyes wild with the zealot's fire that had twisted their bond into chains. "End it, Alara," he snarled, claws glinting as he raised them. The scent of their old mark, a ghost of pine and possession, clashing with the rot of his alliance. "Your tongue dooms us all. Vesper offers purity. Draven, only endless night." But in his gaze, she saw the fracture, not just hatred, but the shame of a mate who had chosen fear over faith, banishing her to preserve his throne. Freedom whispered again, seductive as the wind's howl beyond the walls. Slay him, sever the past, flee into the eternal drifts where no king or traitor could bind her wolf's wild heart. Across the chamber, Draven and Vesper clashed like thunderheads, blades singing through shadows, the air humming with incantations that tore at the fabric of night. Draven's armor was rent, dark viti trailing from gashes that steamed in the chill, his movements a dance of weary grace, each parry laced with the melancholy of brotherhood's ruin. Vesper's laughter echoed hollow, a shade's mockery as he summoned another bolt of twisted ether, the blue flames in the sconces flaring wild, casting their faces in demonic relief. "You sealed us to save yourself, brother," Vesper spat, his voice weaving the dead tongue's venom, fragments Ilara could unravel even from the floor, envy's poison, demanding resurrection through war, not mercy. She pushed to her knees, the stone biting into her palms like penance, the pendant's heat spreading through her veins like liquid fire, igniting her gift once more. The shades hovered, half loyal, half feral, their translucent forms twisting between masters, whispers coalescing into a chorus only she could command. Pleas for unbinding, oaths fractured by king's regrets. Draven's cry cut through the din as Vesper's spell grazed him, hurling him against a shelf, tomes cascading like fallen stars. In that suspended agony, their eyes met, garnet to hazel, guilt to exile, a bond instinctive, resisted through every rational barrier she'd erected. He was no savior, no alpha of her wilds, yet his duty's weight mirrored her loss, his redemption a proof she alone could voice. Love was no crown, but a trial, to heal the damned or walk alone into the moon's indifferent embrace. The choice crystallized, sharp as ice under claw. Not war's blade, nor flight's shadow, but sacrifice's mercy, a union forged in blood's revelation. Ilara surged forward, her voice rising above the storm, the dead tongue flowing pure and unyielding from her lips, channeled through the pendant's crimson glow. Elendor Veshkara Kresh Thal, blood of eternals, bind not in wrath, but in mercy's vein. The words were visceral, tasting of copper and frost on her tongue, each syllable a bridge unraveling Vesper's corruption. The shades turned en masse, their forms solidifying into luminous guardians, flowing toward the rival king like a tide of silver moonlight. Vesper staggered, his spells fracturing, the dead language betraying him under her command, truth's light-piercing envy's veil. Thorn lunged then, a final desperate strike, his jaws snapping toward her throat. But the pendant flared, blinding, its blood dropped shattering in a burst of warmth that flooded her senses, visions cascading, her mother's talisman woven with Dusa's grace, not curse but key to paths unseen. She met him not with claws, but open hands, her voice softening to a whisper that pierced his rage. "Forgive," as the moon forgives the wolf's howl. He faltered, eyes widening in recognition of the omega he had marked, the gift he had feared. His form shuddered, shifting back to man, collapsing to his knees amid the swirling shades, tears carving tracks through the grime on his face. Not death, but surrender, a moral fracture, his freedom bartered for the pack's lost compassion. Vesper howled as the shades enveloped him, not destroying, but binding, Alara's words weaving a seal of healing, drawing the corrupted rites from his blood, purifying the echoes he had twisted. Draven rose, blade lowered, approaching his brother with arms outstretched, the scar on his jaw softening in the lunar glow. "Mercy crowns us both," he murmured, as Vesper's resistance crumbled, the rival's form slumping into embrace, centuries of envy dissolving like mist under dawn. The chamber stilled, blue flames steadying to a warm hearth light, the wind outside softening to a sigh, carrying distant youths of reconciliation, wolves and shadows united under the moon's witness. Ilara stood amid the hush, wounds throbbing but unbowed, the pendant's remnants, a faint scar of silver on her skin, marking her rebirth. Draven turned to her, his hand cupping her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness born of proof, not possession. The connection bloomed fully now, accepted in the quiet aftermath. Love as redemption's fire, tested in blood and choice, her wolf's spirit entwining with his eternal night. No throne awaited, only the shared path, exile healed, guilt absolved. A union whispered under the stars. She leaned into his touch, the cold yielding to warmth, the moon bathing them in silver promise. Strength was Mercy's election, she knew, and in its light they stepped from the ruins, reborn as one. The spire's shadows lifted, crimson veins pulsing with renewed life, and as they emerged into the snow-veiled dawn, the wind carried their oath, a howl and a whisper, eternal. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.